This morning's guest has written a book about the birds and the bees. And it's not about nature, but it could be. You decide. Meet him, coming up next on All American People. Good morning. Welcome to All American People. This morning we're at the Conway Area Chamber of Commerce. We're focused on a new book and we're visiting with its author, Richard M. Lovelace, Jr.
Good morning.
An attorney here in Conway and a writer and wearing many more hats. Thanks so much for coming in.
Glad to be
this
with
morning,
you, Greg.
Richard. And I said a new book. It was actually published in 2008.
That's correct.
And it's something you've been working on for a long time.
I have been for a number of years.
Very exciting to think about, to think that it actually ultimately finally got to being a printed piece.
It did. Well, it started out as a piecemeal work that I ultimately consolidated. It started based upon my wife's admonition and direction that I needed to discuss the facts of life with my sons. And I really felt like the XY chromosome approach wasn't the best thing to deal with when you have a 14-year-old child. I also knew that direct lectures don't do well with teenagers because they'll look 1 inch over your head and pretend to listen, but they tune everything out. So I thought the best vehicle for dealing with that, because they were both off at school, was to write a tome that was apractical with some humorous overtones, that it might have a better impact on them in that format than otherwise.
And it definitely connected. Did you ever get some feedback from them if it was something unlike looking slightly over your head or otherwise that they really took to heart?
Well, my older son is serious as a heart attack, and he smiles as often as a full lunar eclipse. The younger boy is a whole lot looser, and he seemed to enjoy it more, and he distributed it to all of his friends.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Let me go ahead and hold the book up. The book is titled Dealing with Women, and the subtitle is A Survivor's Guide.
That's exactly right.
A Survivor's Guide. Richard M. Lovelace, Jr., the excitement here for you is truly that you were reaching out to some folks who you had a special connection to, your own sons.
That's right. And, you know, I feel particularly well equipped to deal with the topic, both from what I've observed over the last 64 years and what I've experienced personally. Some of the information was third hand, but basically it's all pretty much first-hand knowledge or first-hand observation.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I thought it was particularly relevant in light of the fact that it is so fact-based.
Oh yeah, listen to that. Fact-based as opposed to a lot of fiction out there. The opportunity to get something out as your first piece being as factual as it is. Very exciting. Real quick about yourself, Richard, are you originally from the area?
I was born in Columbia. My father was in the military, but we've lived in Conway for the last 37 years. When I got out of the service and got out of school, we were looking for a small town and a growth area to raise children. And this was the perfect place, and we've come and we've thrived here.
37 years ago.
That's right.
We all knew that even before having children that you would be looking for a place that would set the stage just for that.
Well, I think it's important with the agricultural economy, with the forestry, with the woods, with the streams, with the availability of wildlife or exposure to wildlife, and with the mixed population in the school system.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the racial diversity would be an important part of their education, and it's certainly present here.
Yes, yes, very definitely. And the we here is you and, I think I saw on the back of the cover, Saint Rebecca.
The original arrogant white woman. My wife, yeah, Rebecca. And she is a saint.
That is wonderful. Of course, having lived with you and then raising two boys, my mother, the mother of three boys, I would call the queen of saints, because three sons is a heck of a deal, but surely the opportunity to be here and raising boys. And I believe your wife has a little history in education.
She did. She's got a master's in education. She went to school in New England, taught for a year in Pelion, and then taught 12 years at Conway High School, basically advanced government and economics, and then she spent 11 years as the Horry County Magistrate. So what she essentially did was take her avocation, which was being judgmental, and turned it into her vocation as a judge.
Yes, I'm sure she did very well at that. I'm sure she did. Was this your first attempt at putting any of your pieces into writing, Richard?
I've been writing for a number of years, really back since about 1964. The bulk of my work had been poems, primarily satirical, for occasions, for events. I was the features editor of the newspaper in college, and wrote news articles, but really focused more on features than anything else. But really didn't feel like I'd put anything together which would have a widespread appeal, as literature must, to be successful.
Right.
You know, you have to have the aspect of universality of the topic, relevance to society today, and interest.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Fortunately, you brought a couple other pieces with you. We don't have them here on the table, and hopefully, if we have a chance to get you back tomorrow, we can get into some of the other pieces you're writing. But I believe poetry has been a real love of yours.
It's been a real love, and I've probably produced more poetry than I have prose.
Huh? Was there anything in your background that set the stage for your love of poetry? Is that something you got into at an early age, Richard, or? Well,
my father was an Army colonel, and philosophically he was a little bit to the right of Attila the Hun. and part of my element control over him was to drive him crazy. So when I was at the Citadel and took a course in writing poetry, that really pushed him over the top.
Oh, I bet it did, yeah.
And I enjoyed the course and was able to do well at it, and so I continued.
Now, were you ever able to get some pieces together there that, I mean, actually write some poetry that possibly would have even appealed to your dad?
No.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Not at all. But I mean, I think the things that he read, because he was an English teacher and taught English, I think he felt they met a standard of quality, although the topics weren't necessarily his favorites.
Right, right. Speaking of the Citadel, Richard, I think that was the Citadel what prompted you. I know we hadn't planned originally on talking about some of your military service, but I saw on the back cover of the book that you had served in, you were a Field Artillery Forward Observer for Delta Company 3506 Infantry, and served in the 101st Airborne Division. It's a pretty big deal, the Republic of Vietnam. That was from your Citadel original underpin. I mean, this, having grown up in a military family, is that something you thought about, military service, much of your life?
Well, in 1968, when I graduated from college, if you could read the E in on the eye chart, you were going to the military.
Oh boy!
And the Citadel education allowed one to get a commission as an officer with a 2-year limitation on your tour of duty. And they also provided some financial assistance while I was in college, and so the opportunity to go in as an officer as opposed to an enlisted man, knowing that Vietnam service was imminent, I thought that might add to my chance of survivability. And the other side of the coin was, because I really didn't have any money, the GI Bill represented an opportunity to have my education paid for.
Right, right, very definitely. Very definitely. Can you share with viewers a little bit of your service, or is that, obviously we're focused on your book, Dealing with Women, A Survivor's Guide.
Right.
I think you told us this morning early when you came in that we may be able to finagle you into coming back tomorrow, which would be exciting. But since we've got a little bit of time together, would you be willing to talk a little bit about that, or is that too close to your heart?
Well, I mean, it was 40 years ago, and I just had an opportunity and have just returned from 2 weeks in Vietnam.
Is that right?
But basically my job description was to go out with an infantry company, and when they were in contact or prior to them making an assaults, I would call in artillery, be it howitzers or gun pieces, sometimes tactical air, sometimes Cobra gunships. And generally, because the North Vietnamese, which were our major adversary, were the ones who initiated contact when they had superior forces. And because of the dilution of the company's strengths after the exit from Cambodia in 1970, you'd have infantry companies with 37 people instead of 120 people. And so if contact was initiated, really the only way to bring some balance of power was to bring in artillery or some heavy ordnance and some heavy firepower to gain some sense of equilibrium.
Right.
Until some reinforcements can get there.
And you went in to help plan how much was needed.
Well, you know, I was the first one that got off the helicopter going in, and, you know, we'd get a map before we go in and pre-plan targets so that if artillery was needed, we could call the guns and just say target 1 or target 2.
Wow.
And they'd have rounds ready to go out at that point in time.
Growing up in that, and obviously having experienced that, and having a father like you did, was that something that that your sons ever contemplated? Did they think of military service, following their dad, their grandfather's footsteps?
Quite frankly, you know, the problem with the military structure starting in Vietnam, which unfortunately continues today, is that you have folks who've never been in harm's way and will never go in harm's way, sending young men into harm's way oftentimes for dubious causes. And based on what I saw in Vietnam in terms of what I thought was the corruption of the South Vietnamese government, the lack of support of the South Vietnamese government, the fact that the conflict there was a civil war, I basically was unwilling for my sons to ever participate in a war that was generated by the United States for what I knew would be future dubious causes. And so I basically advised them to avoid military service. My godson recently, I encouraged him, and he went through the Special Forces training because of the mission that they have.
Right.
But in terms of my immediate family, and after my experience in seeing so many folks killed so unnecessarily, I just wasn't willing to have any more risk in the family than we'd already had.
No need to have that. I also saw on the back of the book that your sons are educated and employed. So when you were first writing to them, I think you said they were at, I saw one was at Woodbury. Were they both at Woodbury?
One was at Woodbury Forest and one was at Washington Lee University.
Okay, great. When the letters first went out in '96.
Right. So the first one was the facts of life, and let me just quote for you a couple of the practical bullet points.
Yeah.
1, rubbers break. 2, if the rhythm method actually worked, why do Catholics have such big families? And the third is there are diseases today that soap and water won't wash off and penicillin won't cure. So it was fairly frank, but at the same point in time with some sense of reality and humor at the same time. The second chapter was basically generated, my older son was in high finance in New York, and he was involved in a fairly serious courtship, and he was concerned about marrying this girl who might evacuate his financial strength. And so he wrote to me to ask about prenuptial agreements and
oh wow, what was your advice on? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
My advice was, if you need a prenup, don't get married.
Yeah.
But
good
anyway,
for you, and that sunk in with him?
It sunk in with him, and then we dealt with some other topics, couples living together and the problems that creates economically, and then finally the third chapter was kind of a bullet point tutorial on the axioms that one has to employ in dealing with your wife.
Now this is real, in dealing with your wife.
Dealing with your wife.
Yes.